I was finishing my second cup of coffee on a Wednesday morning in mid-January when I heard the sickening crunch of metal against metal coming from my driveway in Billings, Montana. The sound was distinct, unmistakable, and immediately made my stomach drop. I set down my mug and rushed to the front window, already knowing in my gut that whatever I was about to see would turn into a headache. My 2019 Ford F-350, with the commercial-grade snowplow attachment, sat exactly where I had parked it the night before, angled slightly toward the street on the right side of my driveway. The truck was enormous, bright red, and impossible to miss. The plow blade itself was raised but still clearly visible, painted in reflective yellow and black safety stripes. You would have to be legally blind to not see it sitting there in broad daylight. But apparently, visibility was not a concern for Brenda Carmichael, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, and the single most insufferable person I had ever encountered in my 34 years of life. Her silver Lexus SUV was currently embedded into the driver's side of my parked truck, steam rising from her crumpled hood like she had just attempted to mate her vehicle with mine through sheer force. I grabbed my jacket and bolted outside, my boots crunching through the packed snow on my walkway. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in white puffs as I approached the accident scene. Brenda was already out of her vehicle, phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted into that familiar expression of righteous indignation that I had come to know so well over the past year since moving into this neighborhood. "Yes, I need to report an incident," she was saying into her phone, her voice shrill and carrying easily in the cold morning air. "A resident has created a dangerous obstruction in his driveway, and I've been injured as a result." I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at her in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You hit my parked truck." Brenda held up one manicured finger to silence me, continuing her phone conversation. She was 52 years old, dressed in what probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and had that particular haircut that seemed to be a requirement for women in positions of minor suburban authority. The kind that says, "I would like to speak to the manager without words being necessary." Yes, that's correct. The vehicle was illegally parked and posed a visibility hazard. "I'm going to need police and an ambulance. I think I might have whiplash." She shot me a look that could have frozen the already frigid Montana air. I pulled out my own phone and started recording video. For the record, it's January 15th, approximately 8:30 in the morning. My truck has been parked in this exact spot in my driveway since 7 o'clock last night. It hasn't moved an inch. I'd like to document that Brenda Carmichael has driven her vehicle into my parked truck. "How dare you record me without permission?" Brenda shrieked, lowering her phone. "That's illegal. Montana is a one-party consent state," I replied calmly, keeping my phone steady as I filmed the scene. "And we're in public view. I have every right to document this." The truth was, I had learned a lot about my rights since moving to Meadowbrook Hills. I had to. Brenda had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable from the moment I received my occupancy permit. My crime: running a snow removal business from my home. I had all the proper licenses, my business was fully legitimate, and the city had no issues with my operation. But Brenda had decided it was unseemly for the neighborhood and had been looking for any possible violation she could use against me. Within 10 minutes, a Billings Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb. Officer Martinez stepped out, a middle-aged man with the weary expression of someone who had dealt with more than his fair share of neighborhood disputes. His partner, a younger woman named Officer Chen, joined him as they approached the accident scene. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" Martinez asked, pulling out a notepad. Brenda immediately launched into her version of events. Officer, I was driving through the neighborhood on my routine HOA compliance check when this vehicle suddenly appeared in my path. The owner has been parking it illegally in his driveway, creating a blind spot and safety hazard for the entire community. As you can see, I couldn't avoid the collision. I waited until she finished before calmly presenting my side. Officer, my truck has been parked in my driveway since 7 last night. I can show you the timestamp from my home security footage if needed. Miss Carmichael drove her vehicle into my stationary truck while it was legally parked on my private property. He parks that monstrosity there to intimidate people, Brenda interjected. It violates HOA bylaws about commercial vehicles. Officer Chen walked around both vehicles, taking photographs and measurements. She crouched down to examine the impact points and the tire marks in the snow. When she returned, she had a knowing look on her face. Madam, she addressed Brenda, the evidence clearly shows that this truck has been stationary for quite some time. The snow patterns around the tires are undisturbed except where your vehicle made contact. The impact angle indicates you were driving when the collision occurred, not the truck. Brenda's face flushed red. That's impossible. That truck wasn't there when I started my rounds this morning. What time did you start your rounds? Martinez asked. Around 8:15. I pulled up my security camera app on my phone. I can show you footage from 6 this morning showing my truck in this exact position. Would you like to see it? Martinez nodded, and I played the video for both officers. The footage clearly showed my driveway at various timestamps throughout the morning, with my truck sitting perfectly still in the same spot. Then, at exactly 8:27, Brenda's Lexus appeared on screen, taking the turn into my driveway far too sharply and slamming directly into the driver's side of my truck. Why were you turning into his driveway? Officer Chen asked Brenda pointedly. Brenda stammered for a moment. I was going to leave an HOA violation notice on his door. For what violation? I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Your Christmas lights are still up. It's the 15th of January. That's 2 weeks past the mandated removal date. I gestured to my house. I don't have Christmas lights up. You did yesterday. Yes, and I took them down last night before it got dark. That's why I have a video timestamp. I was filming the removal process to document compliance, specifically because I knew you would try to claim I was in violation. Officer Martinez rubbed his temples. Miss Carmichael, I'm going to need to see your license and insurance information. Based on the evidence here, you're going to be cited for failure to maintain control of your vehicle and for driving on private property without permission. This is outrageous. Brenda sputtered. He's the one who should be cited. That vehicle is a commercial truck. There are HOA covenants about commercial vehicles being parked in residential driveways overnight. HOA covenants aren't criminal law, Martinez said tiredly, clearly having dealt with this particular argument before. If you have a civil dispute about HOA rules, you'll need to handle that through your association's legal channels. What we have here is a traffic accident where you struck a legally parked vehicle on private property. I provided my insurance information to the officers while Brenda continued to argue. An ambulance had arrived, and the EMTs checked Brenda over despite her inability to specify any actual injuries beyond her self-diagnosed whiplash. After the EMTs confirmed she had no apparent injuries and her vital signs were normal, they departed. The damage to my truck was significant. Her front bumper had hit right at the driver's door, crumpling the panel and likely causing frame damage. My stomach churned as I thought about the repair costs and the time my truck would be out of commission. January was my busiest season. We had gotten 14 inches of snow 2 days ago, and another storm was forecast for the weekend. I had contracts with 3 shopping centers, 2 apartment complexes, and about 40 residential clients who depended on me for snow removal. "I'll need to get a full estimate," I told Officer Martinez, "but I'm looking at probably $10,000 to $15,000 in damage, plus lost income while the truck is being repaired." "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," Brenda snapped, climbing back into her damaged Lexus. "This is your fault, and I will not be held liable for your negligence." "Madam, I wouldn't recommend driving that vehicle," Officer Chen said, gesturing to the crushed front end and the fluid leaking onto the pavement. "You need to have it towed." Brenda ignored her, starting the engine. It made a horrible grinding sound, but the Lexus lurched backward out of my driveway. She managed to drive it about 20 feet down the street before it died completely, smoke now billowing from under the hood. "That went well," I muttered, watching as Brenda called for a tow truck from the middle of the street. Officer Martinez handed me a copy of the accident report. "You'll want to contact your insurance company right away. The report clearly indicates she was at fault. If she tries to fight it, you have the security footage as evidence." "Thanks, officer. I appreciate you guys being reasonable about this." "Between you and me," Martinez said quietly, "this isn't the first incident we've had involving Miss Carmichael and her HOA activities. Document everything, keep copies of all your communications, and don't let her bully you." After the police left and Brenda's car was towed away, I called my insurance company and then my business partner, Derek Hoffman. Derek handled a lot of the administrative side of our snow removal business while I did most of the physical work and equipment operation. "Are you kidding me?" Derek said when I explained what happened. "Brenda hit your truck, the one that was parked in your driveway, the very same." "What are we going to do about the Hanson Plaza job tomorrow? That's a 2-plow operation." I sighed, looking at my damaged truck. "I'll rent something. It's going to eat into our profit margin, but we can't miss that contract. We'll lose the client if we don't show up." "Want me to make the calls?" "Yeah, that'd be great. I need to get this documented and submitted to insurance. And Derek, make sure we send a formal notice to all our clients about potential schedule changes. I don't want anyone to think we're unreliable because of this." The rest of the day was consumed by phone calls, photographs, and paperwork. My insurance adjuster came out that afternoon and confirmed what I already knew. The truck was undrivable and needed extensive repairs. The estimate came in at $13,000, not including my rental costs or lost business income. "The good news is that the other driver is clearly at fault," the adjuster, a friendly woman named Patricia, told me. "The police report is clear, you have video evidence, and the physical evidence supports your account. Her insurance will have to cover this." "What if she claims I'm somehow liable?" Patricia laughed, though not unkindly. "She can claim whatever she wants. The facts are the facts." Don't worry about it. But I did worry. I had been dealing with Brenda Carmichael for over a year now, and I knew she didn't let things go easily. The woman was relentless when she felt wronged, and she always felt wronged. My prediction proved accurate 3 days later, when I received a certified letter from a law office in downtown Billings. The return address read Jacobson and Mayer, attorneys at law. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened the envelope, though whether from anger or anxiety, I couldn't tell. The letter was worse than I expected. Brenda wasn't just denying liability for the accident. She was suing me for $50,000 in damages, claiming that my negligent and illegal parking of a commercial vehicle in a residential area created an attractive nuisance and traffic hazard that directly caused the accident and her resulting injuries. I read the document 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. The claims were absurd. She listed injuries including whiplash, emotional distress, anxiety, and something called anticipatory trauma from having to drive past my house in the future. She was also seeking damages for her vehicle repair costs, rental car expenses, and punitive damages for willful negligence. I immediately called my insurance company. They referred me to their legal team, who assured me they would be providing my defense since the incident occurred on my property and involved my insured vehicle. An attorney named Marcus Wellington would be handling my case. Marcus called me within 2 hours of my report. He had a deep, confident voice that immediately put me at ease. "Mr. Peterson, I've reviewed the police report and the complaint filed against you. I want to be very clear about something. This lawsuit is completely frivolous. The evidence overwhelmingly supports that, Miss Carmichael was entirely at fault for this accident." "So what do I need to do?" I asked. "First, don't speak to Miss Carmichael or anyone representing her without me present. Don't post about this on social media. Don't discuss it with neighbors unless absolutely necessary. I'm going to file a response denying all allegations, and I'm fairly confident we can get this dismissed on summary judgment long before it goes to trial. How long will that take? Probably 3 to 4 months if we're lucky. Maybe longer if she fights the dismissal. But don't worry about the costs. Your insurance covers your legal defense." I thanked Marcus and hung up, but I felt sick to my stomach. Even if I ultimately won, Brenda was going to make my life hell for months, and she was just getting started. The next day, I found a bright orange violation notice on my door. According to the HOA, my rental truck, a white F450 I was using while mine was being repaired, violated the community standards because it had a business logo on the side. The notice demanded I remove the vehicle within 24 hours or face a $500 daily fine. I photographed the notice and emailed it to Marcus Wellington. His response was swift and blunt. "Ignore it. They can't enforce that. It's selective enforcement if other residents have vehicles with business logos, and it's likely not enforceable anyway under Montana property law. Let them try to fine you. We'll add it to our evidence of harassment." But the harassment didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices for my mailbox being improperly maintained because it had snow on top of it, for my trash cans being visible from the street on collection day, and for tracking snow from my driveway onto the public sidewalk. Each notice threatened increasing fines and potential legal action. I documented everything. I took photographs, saved every email and letter, and kept detailed notes of every interaction. My file on Brenda Carmichael and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA was growing thicker by the day. The situation escalated in early February. I came home from a long day of plowing to find my driveway blocked by an HOA towing company truck. A man in a reflective vest was attaching chains to my rental plow truck. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, jumping out of my personal car and running over. "HOA ordered the removal of this vehicle," the tow truck operator said, not looking up from his work. "Unauthorized commercial vehicle on the property." "This is my property and that's my legally rented vehicle. You can't tow it." "I have authorization from the HOA." He held up a work order signed by Brenda Carmichael. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus Wellington, putting it on speaker. When he answered, I quickly explained the situation. "Put the tow truck driver on the phone," Marcus instructed. I handed my phone to the driver, who listened for about 30 seconds before his face went pale. He handed the phone back to me and began unhooking my truck without another word. "What did you tell him?" I asked Marcus. "That he was attempting to steal private property from a private residence, that it's a felony in Montana, and that both he and the towing company would be named in a lawsuit if he didn't stop immediately. I also told him that the HOA has no legal authority to order the removal of vehicles from private property without a court order." The tow truck driver left quickly, and I made sure to get his company's information and the work order he had been given. It was more evidence for the growing pile. That evening, I received a call from Derek. "Mark, we need to talk about the business. This situation with the HOA is starting to affect our reputation." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I got a call today from Hanson Plaza. Someone contacted them claiming our business isn't properly licensed and that we've been cited for safety violations. They're threatening to terminate our contract." "That's complete bullshit," I said, my voice rising. "We have every license we need and we've never had a safety violation." "Who contacted them?" The person didn't leave a name, but the property manager said it was a woman who claimed to be with the Billings Business Compliance Bureau. "There's no such thing as the Billings Business Compliance Bureau," I said. "Derek, Brenda is sabotaging our business." "Can she do that? Isn't that illegal?" "It's definitely illegal. It's tortious interference, possibly defamation and business libel. I need to call Marcus." I was back on the phone with my attorney within minutes, explaining this new development. Marcus listened carefully and asked me to send him any documentation Derek had received, along with contact information for Hanson Plaza. "This is actually good for us," Marcus said, which seemed like an insane thing to say. "If we can prove she's deliberately trying to damage your business, it strengthens your position significantly. It shows a pattern of harassment and potentially malicious intent. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter immediately." Will that actually make her stop? Probably not. But it creates a legal record that she was warned. When she continues, as I suspect she will, it demonstrates that her actions are willful and deliberate. That matters if we end up pursuing counterclaims or criminal charges. Criminal charges. Making false statements to damage a business can be criminal fraud in Montana. Let's see how this plays out. Marcus sent a strongly worded cease and desist letter to Brenda the next day. I know this because I received 3 new HOA violation notices within 6 hours of her receiving it. One claimed my house number was insufficiently visible from the street. Another said my doormat was non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. And the third alleged that I had parked on the street for 17 minutes the previous Tuesday, which violated the no street parking rule. The street parking thing was particularly galling because I had only pulled to the curb to check my phone for an address before driving to a client's property. And half the neighborhood had cars parked on the street at any given time, including Brenda herself. "She's lost her mind," Derek said when I showed him the latest notices. "This is insane." "No, it's strategic," I corrected. "She thinks if she buries me in violations and fines, I'll either move out or settle her lawsuit to make it stop. She's done this before to other residents." That was true. After I started documenting Brenda's behavior, I had reached out to other homeowners in Meadowbrook Hills. I learned that I was far from the first person she had targeted. 3 families had moved out in the past 2 years specifically because of her harassment. One elderly couple had sold their home at a loss just to escape the constant violation notices and threats of legal action over minor issues like mailbox placement and lawn height. But those people hadn't fought back. They had just left, and Brenda had faced no consequences for driving them out. I wasn't going to do that. This was my home, My business depended on this location, and I'd be damned if I was going to let some power-hungry HOA president force me out through harassment and frivolous lawsuits. I started attending HOA meetings. The monthly gathering was held in the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. Usually, only about 10 people attended, mostly older residents or people who served on the board. When I walked in on the first Tuesday of March, heads turned. Brenda sat at the front of the room behind a folding table, flanked by two other board members, Gary Richardson, the vice president, and Helen Torres, the treasurer. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she couldn't refuse my attendance. As a property owner in the community, I had every right to be there. "We have a visitor tonight," Brenda announced coldly. "Mr. Peterson, I assume you're here to address the numerous violations that have been issued to your property." "No," I said calmly, taking a seat in the third row. "I'm here because I'm a member of this community, and I have a right to attend HOA meetings. I'd like to observe how the association conducts its business. There are proper procedures for requesting time to speak," Brenda said. "I'm aware. I'm not requesting speaking time. I'm simply observing." Brenda's jaw tightened, but she moved on to the meeting agenda. For the next hour, I listened as they discussed utterly mundane topics: the budget for spring landscaping, approval of new paint colors for the community entrance sign, and a lengthy debate about whether the Christmas decoration contest should be expanded to include prizes for second and third place. When they reached the part of the agenda labeled Enforcement Actions, Brenda's demeanor changed. She sat up straighter and opened a thick binder. "The board has issued 43 violation notices this month," she announced. "Of those, 37 have been resolved. 6 remain open, with 5 of them belonging to a single property owner who has shown willful disregard for community standards." Everyone in the room knew she was talking about me. "I move that we proceed with legal action to enforce the outstanding violations and collect the associated fines, which now total $7,500, Brenda continued. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I'd like to address that." "You didn't request speaking time," Brenda snapped. "This directly concerns me, and I have a right to respond to accusations made in a public meeting." Gary Richardson, the vice president, leaned toward Brenda and whispered something. She looked furious but nodded tightly. "You have 2 minutes," she said. I pulled out my folder of documentation. "Every violation notice I've received has been either completely false, selectively enforced, or in retaliation for legal matters unrelated to HOA compliance. I have photographic evidence that these alleged violations either don't exist or are being applied only to my property while identical situations at other properties are ignored." "That's a serious accusation," Helen Torres said, looking uncomfortable. "It's a documented fact," I replied. "For example, I was cited for having my trash cans visible from the street on collection day. However, every single house on my street has trash cans visible on collection day. That's how trash collection works. I was cited for parking a rental truck in my driveway, but there are 6 other properties in this neighborhood with commercial vehicles parked in driveways or visible from the street." "Those situations are different," Brenda interjected. "How?" "What specific difference makes my rental truck a violation while Tom Harrison's landscaping trailer is acceptable? Or while Jennifer Marsh's vehicle with her real estate company logo gets a pass? We're not here to debate individual cases," Brenda said, her voice rising. "The board has made its determinations, and residents are required to comply." "The board doesn't have unlimited authority," I countered. "Montana law requires HOA enforcement to be reasonable and consistently applied. selective enforcement is illegal. And most of these alleged violations aren't even covered by the actual CC and Articus. I had done my homework. After receiving the first few violation notices, I had obtained a copy of the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions from the county recorder's office. Half the things Brenda was citing me for weren't actually in the governing documents. They were from a separate community guidelines document that the board had created, but which had never been properly voted on by the homeowners. "I think we should table this discussion," Gary Richardson said, looking nervous. "Maybe have our attorney review the enforcement actions before we proceed with collection efforts." "The board has authority to enforce community standards," Brenda insisted. "We don't need to consult an attorney for every decision. Actually, if there's a question about the legality of the enforcement actions, it would be prudent to get legal advice," Helen said. I could see Brenda's control slipping. She was used to other board members simply going along with her decisions, but now they were questioning her. The meeting ended shortly after, with no vote on pursuing collection of the fines against me. As I left the community center, an older man approached me in the parking lot. I recognized him as Robert Chen, who lived 4 houses down from me. "That was brave, what you did in there," he said. "Most people are too afraid of Brenda to speak up." "Someone needs to," I replied. "She can't be allowed to just bully people. My wife and I have lived here for 8 years. Brenda became HOA president 4 years ago, and the neighborhood has changed completely since then. It used to be friendly, community-oriented. Now everyone's afraid they'll get a violation notice if their grass is half an inch too long or their car is parked at the wrong angle." "Has she targeted you?" "Oh yes. We got 14 violation notices last year. Everything from our mailbox being crooked, which it wasn't, to our dog barking excessively, which was interesting since our dog died 3 years ago. We showed her the death certificate, and she still insisted we had a dog and fined us $500. Did you pay it?" "We did. We couldn't afford a legal fight. We're retired and on a fixed income, but it made us sick to do it." I thought about Robert's story as I drove home that night. Brenda wasn't just harassing me. She was terrorizing the entire neighborhood, and most people felt powerless to stop her. The preliminary hearing for Brenda's lawsuit was scheduled for mid-March at the Yellowstone County Courthouse. Marcus Wellington had filed our response denying all allegations, and including a counterclaim for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and defamation. He had warned me that Brenda's attorney would likely try to paint me as a reckless business owner who created dangerous conditions. What I hadn't expected was the theatrics. Brenda arrived at the courthouse wearing a neck brace and leaning heavily on a cane. She moved slowly and painfully, grimacing with each step. It would have been impressive acting if I hadn't seen her the previous week getting out of her car at the grocery store, moving normally and carrying 2 heavy bags of groceries without any assistance. Is she serious with that? I whispered to Marcus as we watched Brenda make her dramatic entrance into the courtroom. Apparently, her medical records don't support any injury requiring a neck brace or mobility assistance, so this is all for show. The judge will see through it. The preliminary hearing was before Judge Patricia Thornton, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for not tolerating frivolous lawsuits. Marcus had told me this was good for our side. Brenda's attorney, a slick-looking man named David Jacobson, stood to present their case. "Your Honor, my client suffered serious injuries when the defendant's illegally parked vehicle created a hazardous condition in the roadway. Mr. Peterson operates a commercial snow removal business from his residence in clear violation of HOA covenants, and has repeatedly demonstrated negligence and disregard for community safety. Counselor, this is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed to trial, Judge Thornton said. I don't need opening arguments. Present your evidence that the defendant's vehicle was illegally parked or created an actionable hazard. Jacobson seemed thrown by this. Well, Your Honor, the evidence includes the accident itself, my client's injuries, and the testimony of other community members about the defendant's pattern of behavior. Do you have evidence that the vehicle was illegally parked? Yes or no? The vehicle was in violation of HOA covenants. That's not what I asked. Was the vehicle in violation of any traffic laws or ordinances? The HOA governs what can be parked in residential driveways. Again, not what I asked. Was the defendant's vehicle legally parked on his own private property? Jacobson hesitated. Technically, yes. But then there's no negligence in parking a vehicle on one's own property. What about your client's claim of serious injury? I have the medical records here. The emergency room visit on the day of the accident showed no injuries. The follow-up visit with her personal physician 3 days later noted some reported neck stiffness but no objective findings. The MRI taken a week after the accident was normal. What serious injuries are we talking about? My client has been in significant pain and has suffered emotional trauma from this incident. Counselor, pain and suffering damages require an underlying compensable injury. If there's no physical injury beyond temporary soreness, which is normal in a minor traffic accident, there's no basis for the damage amount you're claiming. Judge Thornton turned to Marcus. Does the defense have evidence to present? Marcus stood, holding a tablet. Your Honor, I have several pieces of evidence. First, the police report clearly indicates that the plaintiff was at fault for the accident. Second, we have security camera footage showing the plaintiff's vehicle striking the defendant's stationary truck. Third, we have evidence that the plaintiff has engaged in a pattern of harassment against the defendant, including filing false complaints with his business clients and issuing frivolous HOA violations. I'd like to see this footage, Judge Thornton said. Marcus approached the bench with his tablet and played the security footage. Even from where I sat, I could see Brenda's face flush red as the video clearly showed her driving into my parked truck. Judge Thornton watched the footage twice before leaning back in her chair. Miss Carmichael, you drove your vehicle into Mr. Peterson's parked truck. The video evidence is unambiguous. On what basis are you claiming he was negligent? Brenda stood, clutching her cane. Your Honor, that truck is a menace to the neighborhood. He parks it there to intimidate people. He's running an illegal business and, Madam, I'm going to stop you there. Whether or not you approve of his business or where he parks his truck is not relevant to this lawsuit. You drove into a stationary vehicle on private property. That makes you at fault. I'm granting the defendant's motion to dismiss. Your Honor, you can't. Jacobson started to protest. I absolutely can, and I am. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering the plaintiff to pay the defendant's legal fees and costs associated with defending this action. Miss Carmichael, you need to be very careful about filing frivolous lawsuits. This borders on abuse of the legal system. Brenda's neck brace seemed to be less necessary as she stood up straight, her face purple with rage. This is outrageous. That man has destroyed our community. He needs to be stopped. Madam, sit down, Judge Thornton said firmly. You're in my courtroom and you will control yourself. As we left the courthouse, I felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The lawsuit was dismissed and Brenda would have to pay my legal fees. But Marcus pulled me aside before we reached the parking lot. Don't celebrate too much yet, he warned. She's not going to let this go. People like her never do. She's going to escalate, and you need to be prepared for that. What else can she do? The lawsuit is over. She still controls the HOA. She can still make your life difficult through violation notices and fines. And my guess is she's going to get more aggressive now that she's lost in court. Marcus was right. Within 3 days of the court dismissal, I received a certified letter from the HOA informing me that I was being fined $15,000 for conducting illegal commercial activities from a residential property. The letter claimed that my snow removal business violated both HOA covenants and city zoning laws, and that I had 30 days to cease all business operations or face additional fines and legal action. I immediately forwarded the letter to Marcus, who called me back within an hour. This is exactly what I was afraid of. She's retaliating for the lawsuit dismissal. But she's made a mistake. This is such obvious retaliation that we can use it against her. What do I do? First, document that you have all proper business licenses and that your operation is fully compliant with city zoning. Get something in writing from the city if possible. Second, I'm going to send another cease and desist letter, this one specifically addressing this retaliatory fine. Third, we're going to start building a case for harassment and potentially pursue criminal charges. Criminal charges. What she's doing is extortion, Mark. She's using her position in the HOA to try to force you out of your home and destroy your business because you stood up to her. In Montana, that can be criminal. I contacted the Billings Planning and Zoning Department the next morning. After explaining my situation, they provided me with a written statement confirming that my business was properly licensed, and that home-based businesses were permitted in my zoning district as long as they met certain criteria, all of which I satisfied. They also noted that they had received an anonymous complaint about my business 3 weeks earlier, which they had investigated and found to be baseless. I would have bet everything I owned that Brenda had filed that anonymous complaint. Armed with the documentation from the city, I attended the next HOABoard meeting in April. This time, I came prepared with copies of all my licenses, the city's statement, and my attorney's letter responding to the $15,000 fine. The meeting started normally enough, but when they reached the enforcement actions portion of the agenda, I raised my hand. I'm requesting speaking time to address the fine levied against my property, I said. Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but Gary Richardson immediately said, "Granted." I stood and distributed copies of my documentation to the board members. The fine I received claims that I'm operating an illegal business. However, as you can see from these documents, my business is fully licensed and compliant with all city regulations. The city has confirmed in writing that my operation is legal and appropriate for my zoning district. Therefore, the fine is baseless and needs to be rescinded. The HOA covenants prohibit commercial activities, Brenda said flatly. I've read the covenants. They prohibit businesses that generate significant traffic, noise, or other disruptions. My business consists of me leaving in my truck to plow snow at other locations. I don't have clients coming to my property. I don't generate noise beyond a vehicle starting in the morning. This is exactly the type of home-based business that the covenants allow. Your interpretation doesn't override the board's authority to enforce the covenants, Brenda insisted. Actually, Montana law says that HOA covenants must be interpreted reasonably, and that restrictions on property use must be clearly stated and narrowly construed. If there's ambiguity, it's resolved in favor of the property owner. An attorney can explain that to you if needed. Helen Torres, the treasurer, spoke up. Brenda, I think we need to consult our attorney before we try to enforce this fine. If the city says his business is legal, I'm not comfortable with the HOA contradicting that. We don't need to consult an attorney every time a resident doesn't want to follow the rules, Brenda snapped. This is different, Gary Richardson said. This is a $15,000 fine. That's not insignificant. If we're wrong, the HOA could be liable. Fine, Brenda said, her voice dripping with anger. We'll consult the attorney, but that doesn't change the fact that Mr. Peterson's activities are inappropriate for this neighborhood. After the meeting, 3 different residents approached me to thank me for standing up to Brenda. One of them, a woman named Susan Park, told me that Brenda had fined her $8,000 the previous year for replacing her mailbox without HOA approval, even though her old mailbox had been destroyed by a snowplow and needed immediate replacement. I paid the fine because I couldn't afford to fight it, Susan said, but I've regretted it ever since. She's a bully and someone needs to stop her. Maybe we can, I said, an idea forming in my mind. Over the next 2 weeks, I contacted every resident I could find who had been targeted by Brenda. I compiled a list of 17 families who had received what they believed were unfair or retaliatory violation notices and fines. The total amount of fines collected by the HOA over the past 4 years, according to their own financial records, was over $200,000. That was a staggering amount for a neighborhood of only 80 homes. It meant that on average, each household had been fined $2,500 over 4 years. And according to the people I talked to, almost all of those fines had been issued under Brenda's presidency. I brought this information to Marcus Wellington, who reviewed everything carefully. This is a pattern of abuse, he said. I think we have grounds for a class action lawsuit against the HOA and potentially against Brenda personally for abuse of authority and unjust enrichment. Would people be willing to join a lawsuit? I asked. Based on what you're telling me, absolutely. People are angry, but they've been afraid to act individually. If you organize them into a group action, you'll have more leverage and the costs will be distributed among all the plaintiffs. I organized a meeting at my house for everyone who had expressed interest in taking action against the HOA. 23 people showed up, filling my living room and spilling into the kitchen. Marcus attended to explain the legal options. What we're looking at is a pattern of abuse of authority by the HOA board, specifically by Miss Carmichael, Marcus explained. She's been using her position to levy fines that either aren't supported by the covenants or are being selectively enforced. Montana law requires HOA boards to act reasonably and in good faith. Based on the evidence Mr. Peterson has compiled, there's a strong argument that the board has been acting in bad faith. What would a lawsuit accomplish? Robert Chen asked. Several things. First, we could seek to have the improperly levied fines refunded. Second, we could seek to remove the current board and require new elections. Third, we could seek damages for harassment and emotional distress. And fourth, we could ask the court to appoint a receiver to oversee the HOA's operations until proper governance is established. I'm in, Susan Park said immediately. I want my $8,000 back and I want Brenda removed from the board. Others quickly agreed. By the end of the meeting, 17 families had committed to joining the lawsuit. Marcus said that was more than enough to proceed. The lawsuit was filed in early May. It named the Meadowbrook Hills HOA and Brenda Carmichael personally as defendants in alleged abuse of authority, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We sought refunds of all improperly collected fines, removal of the current board, and compensatory damages. The lawsuit made local news. A reporter from the Billings Gazette interviewed me and several other plaintiffs, and the resulting article painted a damning picture of Brenda's reign as HOA president. The headline read, "Meadowbrook Hills residents say HOA president abused power, collected hundreds of thousands in questionable fines." The article quoted me saying, "This isn't about one person having a grudge. This is about a pattern of behavior where someone in a position of power has used that power to harass, intimidate, and financially harm the people she's supposed to serve. It needs to stop." Brenda's response came in the form of yet another violation notice. This one claimed that by holding a meeting at my house with more than 20 attendees, I had violated occupancy limits and created a public nuisance. The fine was $10,000. "She's completely lost it," Derek said when I showed him the notice. "She's just making stuff up now." "That's good for our lawsuit," Marcus said when I called him. "Every additional violation notice she issues strengthens our case that she's acting vindictively. Keep them all. Document everything." The HOA's attorney, not David Jacobson, who had represented Brenda in the dismissed lawsuit, but a different lawyer named Patricia Myers, reached out to Marcus in June. She wanted to discuss a settlement. "They're worried," Marcus told me after the call. "They know they're exposed here. The board's insurance company is getting nervous about the potential liability." "What kind of settlement are they offering?" "They want to refund $50,000 in fines to all the plaintiffs, drop all outstanding violation notices, and agree to adopt new enforcement procedures that require board votes before fines are issued. But they want the lawsuit dropped, and they don't want any admission of wrongdoing." "What about removing Brenda from the board?" "They won't agree to that. They say that's up to the homeowners to decide through the normal election process." I discussed the settlement offer with the other plaintiffs. Opinions were divided. Some people just wanted their money back and for the harassment to stop. Others wanted to see Brenda removed and held accountable. "Here's what I think," I said at our group meeting. "If we take this settlement, Brenda stays in power. Maybe she'll be better about following procedures for a while, but she'll still control the board. And in 6 months or a year, she'll start doing the same things again. If we want real change, we need to see this through." "But going to trial could take a year or more," one resident pointed out. "And there's no guarantee we'll win." "Actually, there is a third option," Marcus interjected. "We can refuse the settlement and push for mediation. In mediation, we might be able to negotiate Brenda's resignation as part of the agreement. It's not as formal as a trial, but it gives us more leverage than just accepting their first offer." The group voted to reject the settlement offer and request mediation. The mediation was scheduled for August at the offices of a professional mediation service in Billings. In the meantime, summer arrived and the neighborhood tensions continued to simmer. Brenda stopped issuing violation notices to the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, probably on advice of her attorney, but she ramped up her enforcement against everyone else. It was clear she was trying to show that she was being fair and balanced in her duties, but it only made more people angry. At the July HOA meeting, a motion was made to hold a special election to recall the current board. The motion required signatures from 25% of homeowners to trigger a vote. Within 2 weeks, the petition had signatures from 47% of the neighborhood. The recall election was scheduled for September. Brenda fought the recall effort viciously. She sent letters to every homeowner claiming that the recall was being organized by a radical element that wanted to destroy property values and turn the neighborhood into a commercial zone. She held a special meeting where she presented a lengthy slideshow about all the improvements made under her leadership, conveniently ignoring the hundreds of thousands in fines she had collected. but the damage was done. Too many people had been hurt by her actions, and word had spread throughout the community. The article in the Gazette had been shared widely on social media, and people from other neighborhoods started sharing their own HOA horror stories. The mediation in August was intense. It lasted for 6 hours, with both sides in separate rooms while the mediator shuttled between them. The HOA's insurance company had sent a representative, which Marcus said was a good sign that they wanted to settle. The final agreement reached that evening included several key provisions. First, the HOA would refund $120,000 in fines to the plaintiffs and other affected homeowners. Second, all outstanding violation notices against plaintiffs would be dropped. Third, new enforcement procedures would be adopted requiring a majority board vote before any fine over $500 could be issued. Fourth, and most importantly, Brenda Carmichael would resign as HOA president effective immediately and would not seek re-election to any board position for at least 3 years. Brenda fought that last provision hard, but ultimately her attorney and the insurance representative convinced her that it was better to resign than face a trial where her actions would be examined in detail in open court. When the agreement was finalized, I felt a sense of relief, but also exhaustion. The entire ordeal had lasted 8 months, from the day she crashed into my truck until her resignation. It had consumed countless hours, caused enormous stress, and cost me time and money that I would never fully recover, but it was worth it. As we left the mediation office that evening, Susan Park hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for not just rolling over like everyone expected. You changed things." The recall election still went forward in September, and the entire board was replaced with new members who committed to transparent, fair governance. One of the first actions of the new board was to adopt a Bill of Rights for homeowners that limited the board's authority and required detailed documentation before any fines could be issued. In October, I received a check for $12,000 from the HOA, representing the fines that had been improperly assessed against me. My truck had been fully repaired, and my business was thriving. The rental costs and lost income from the accident had been covered by Brenda's insurance, and I had even picked up several new clients who had heard about my situation and wanted to support a small business owner who had stood up to a bully. One evening in November, almost a year after the accident, I was sitting in my living room when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Brenda standing on my porch. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her authority. "I wanted to say something to you," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Okay," I replied cautiously, one hand on the door frame. "I'm not going to apologize because I still think you were wrong about the commercial vehicle situation, but I will say that things got out of hand. I let my anger control my actions, and that was unprofessional. It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from Brenda, it was probably the closest I would ever get." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "For what it's worth, I never wanted things to escalate the way they did. I just wanted to live in my house and run my business without constant harassment." She nodded stiffly and turned to leave, then paused. "That truck of yours, the one I hit, it was really parked legally, wasn't it? It was never about the parking." "No," I agreed. "It was never about the parking." She walked away without another word, and I closed the door. I never saw her at another HOA meeting, and according to neighborhood gossip, she and her husband sold their house the following spring and moved to Arizona. The new HOA board was functional and reasonable. They enforced rules fairly and focused on actual community improvements rather than hunting for violations. Violation notices dropped by over 90% in the first year under new leadership. The neighborhood became friendlier, with people actually talking to each other instead of living in fear of their neighbors reporting them to the HOA. My business continued to grow. Derek and I expanded our operations and bought a second truck. I eventually moved the business to a commercial location to have more space for equipment, though by that point it was my choice, not because anyone was forcing me out. Looking back on everything that happened, I learned several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. The security footage, the photographs, the detailed notes, all of it made the difference between my word against hers and having actual proof of what happened. Second, standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it's hard and expensive and stressful. Brenda had gotten away with her behavior for years because people were afraid to challenge her. Third, you're often not alone even when you feel like you are. There were dozens of people in that neighborhood who had been hurt by Brenda's actions, and once someone stood up first, others found the courage to join in. The accident that started everything, the day Brenda crashed her Lexus into my parked snowplow, seemed almost absurd in retrospect. Such a simple, straightforward incident should never have turned into an 8-month legal battle and community uprising. But that's what happens when someone in power refuses to admit they're wrong and instead doubles down on their mistakes. I still live in Meadowbrook Hills. My house sits on the corner lot with the curved driveway where my truck was parked that cold January morning. Sometimes when I pull in after a long night of plowing snow, I glance at the spot where Brenda's Lexus embedded itself into my truck door. The driveway was resurfaced the following summer, so there's no physical evidence of the impact anymore. But the memory is still vivid. I think about how differently things could have gone. If I hadn't had security cameras, it would have been much harder to prove what happened. If I hadn't been willing to push back against the violation notices and fines, I might have been driven out like other residents before me. If I hadn't organized the other affected homeowners, Brenda might still be HOA president, still collecting questionable fines, still making people's lives miserable. The whole experience changed how I view community governance and the importance of checks on authority. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining property values and community standards, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants when there's no oversight or accountability. The power to fine people hundreds or thousands of dollars for minor infractions is significant power, and it needs to be exercised responsibly. I also gained a new appreciation for the importance of good legal representation. Marcus Wellington's expertise and guidance were invaluable throughout the process. He understood not just the law but also the psychology of dealing with someone like Brenda. He knew when to push hard and when to be patient, when to threaten and when to negotiate. Perhaps most importantly, the experience taught me about community and solidarity. When I first moved to Meadowbrook Hills, I barely knew my neighbors. I was focused on my business and my own life. But going through this ordeal forced me to reach out, to connect with other people who were dealing with similar problems. Those connections became genuine friendships. Robert and his wife have become close friends. Susan Park's kids sometimes shovel my driveway as a surprise when I've been out plowing all night. The neighborhood actually feels like a community now, rather than just a collection of houses occupied by strangers. There are still HOA rules, of course. I still have to maintain my property and follow reasonable guidelines about yard maintenance and exterior modifications. But the difference is that the rules are now enforced fairly and consistently, with common sense applied to individual situations. When someone violates a rule, They first get a friendly notice explaining the issue and asking them to correct it. Fines are a last resort, not the first response. The new board also implemented a system where residents can challenge violation notices before a neutral committee, ensuring that no single person has unchecked authority to levy fines. It's the kind of basic oversight that should have existed from the beginning but had been eliminated under Brenda's leadership. As winter approached again, marking a full year since the accident, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired. My snowplow truck was back in service, better than ever after the repairs. My business was strong. My home life was peaceful. And I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and that standing up for yourself and others is worth whatever price you have to pay. I thought about Brenda sometimes, living in Arizona and presumably no longer wielding power over a homeowners association. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, or if she simply blamed everyone else for what happened. I hoped she had found some peace and perspective, but I honestly didn't know. What I did know was that the neighborhood she left behind was better without her toxic presence. Property values hadn't collapsed despite her dire warnings. The community hadn't descended into chaos. Instead, people were happier, more engaged, and more willing to take care of their properties because they weren't living in constant fear of arbitrary punishment. The story of how an HOA president crashed into my parked snowplow and then tried to sue me for her own mistake became something of a legend in Billings. Other neighborhoods with problematic HOAs reached out to me for advice. A few local news outlets did follow-up stories. I even got invited to speak at a community governance workshop about the importance of accountability in homeowners associations. I always told people the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up to bullies. It sounds simple, but it's surprisingly hard to do when you're facing someone who seems to have all the power. The key is remembering that their power is limited and conditional, and when they abuse it, there are legal remedies available. The checks I received as part of the settlement didn't just represent returned fines. They represented justice, accountability, and the principle that no one is above the law or beyond consequences, regardless of what position they hold in a community organization. That was worth fighting for. As I write this, sitting in my living room in the house that I fought to keep, I can look out the window and see my snowplow truck parked in the same spot where it was on that January morning. The truck that Brenda claimed was a hazard, a nuisance, an illegal obstruction. The truck that was simply parked in my driveway, exactly where it had every right to be. That truck represents my livelihood, my independence, and my refusal to be pushed around by someone who thought their title gave them the right to harass and intimidate. Every time I started up and head out to plow snow for my clients, I remember that I earned the right to park it there, not through compliance with a bully's unreasonable demands, but by standing firm and demanding fairness. The neighborhood kids sometimes ask me about the accident, having heard stories from their parents. I tell them it's a reminder that accidents happen, but how you handle what comes after matters more than the accident itself. I tell them that when someone tries to blame you for their mistakes, the truth will eventually come out if you're patient and persistent. I've kept all the documentation from those 8 months in a file box in my office. The violation notices, the legal filings, the photographs, the security footage, all of it. I don't look at it often, but it's there as a reminder of what I went through and what I overcame. Sometimes when I'm having a difficult day or facing a challenge with the business, I'll think about that period and realize that if I survived Brenda Carmichael's campaign of harassment, I can handle whatever current problem I'm facing. The experience also made me more empathetic to other people facing similar situations. When I hear about someone dealing with a difficult HOA or an unreasonable authority figure, I always offer to help however I can. Sometimes that's just listening and offering encouragement. Sometimes it's sharing the contact information for Marcus Wellington or other attorneys who understand these issues. And sometimes it's showing them that it's possible to win, even when it seems impossible. Derek often jokes that I should write a book about the experience. Maybe someday I will. The full story, with all its details and frustrations and small victories, could fill a substantial volume. For now, I'm content knowing that I made a difference in my community and helped a lot of people get justice for the way they had been treated. The other day, I ran into Gary Richardson, the former vice president of the HOA board under Brenda's leadership. He apologized for not standing up to her sooner and admitted that he had been intimidated by her aggressive personality. We talked for a while about how organizations can go wrong when good people stay silent out of fear or a desire to avoid conflict. "You changed this neighborhood," Gary told me. "Not just by getting rid of Brenda, but by showing people that they don't have to accept abuse from people in authority." That's valuable. I appreciated his words, but I also reminded him that it wasn't just me. 17 families joined that lawsuit. 47% of the neighborhood signed the recall petition. The community came together to demand change. I just happened to be the one who got things started by refusing to back down when Brenda crashed into my truck and then tried to blame me for it. That's really what the whole story comes down to. Someone in power made a mistake, refused to admit it, and then used their authority to try to punish the person they had wronged. It's a pattern that plays out in communities across America every day. Sometimes the person being wronged just accepts it because fighting seems too hard or too expensive or too risky. But sometimes, someone decides they've had enough and pushes back. I'm glad I was that person. I'm glad I had the resources and the stubbornness to see it through. And I'm especially glad that my actions helped so many other people who had been suffering in silence under Brenda's leadership. The snowplow sits in my driveway tonight, ready for tomorrow's forecast storm. Another winter, another season of early mornings and long nights clearing snow from parking lots and driveways. But I do it from my home in my neighborhood without fear of harassment or retaliation. That's all I ever wanted, and it's what I fought for. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Brenda had just accepted responsibility for hitting my truck that morning, apologized, and moved on. We probably would have processed the insurance claims like normal people and gone our separate ways. Instead, her decision to double down on her mistake and try to blame me set off a chain of events that ended her tenure as HOA president and exposed years of abuse. There's a lesson in that about the importance of accountability and humility, especially for people in positions of authority. When you make a mistake, own it. When you're wrong, admit it. And when you've hurt someone, apologize and make it right. These simple principles, if followed, could prevent so much unnecessary conflict and pain, but Brenda couldn't do those things. Her ego and her need to always be right were more important to her than fairness or honesty. And ultimately, that character flaw led to her downfall and exposed the systemic problems in how she had been running the HOA. As I prepare for bed tonight, my truck outside and my conscience clear, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I won against Brenda, but because I stood up for what was right and helped make my community a better place. That's worth more than any settlement check or legal victory. The story that started with a crash on a cold January morning ended with justice, accountability, and positive change. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, and it wasn't fun. But it was necessary, and I'm proud of how it turned out. Tomorrow I'll wake up early, start my truck, and head out to plow snow. It's what I do, it's my business, and I have every right to do it from my home in Meadowbrook Hills. And no HOA president, no matter how determined or vindictive, will ever take that away from me again.